Hey everybody, it's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Frederick the Great's first defeat, Battle of Kolin, 1757 by House of History. Now, if you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes in this Frederick the Great series by House of History, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, it is probably obvious that I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. So, without further ado, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to House of History and support their channel. And well, I've rambled on too long to what I had to say, so let's get this up on screen and see what happens in this episode. Oh yeah, nearly forgot. For these videos I'm going to put the captions on, so sorry if you know it, if anyone notices that any of them are incorrect.
The 1757 Battle of Prague was an incredibly bloody and costly affair for Austria and Prussia. Suffering enormous casualties, Prussia's King Frederick the Great emerged victoriously. Still, the fleeing Austrians retreated behind the Bohemian capital's walls. Frederick was convinced he could force the city and its garrison to its knees. On May 29, he began the bombardment of Prague. With 10 25-pounder guns and 12 heavy mortars, the Prussians fired over 30,000 shells.
Jeez.
But the garrison in Prague evidently enjoyed more provisions and tenacity than Frederick anticipated. Then horrifying news reached him. By early June, he learned of Field Marshal Leopold Count von Daun assembling a new large army to the east. Initially, Frederick assumed this was no more than 20,000 troops. Daun probably retreated with them after learning of the Austrian defeat at Prague. But General Georg Puttkamer, who chased the fleeing Austrian garrison, relayed to him Daun commanded 55,000 soldiers, including those who fled the Battle of Prague. This was a serious problem. Frederick did not have enough resources to conduct a siege and face a massive...
That's the thing, it's alright putting these places under siege, but you gotta have supplies yourself to carry out the siege, and it's not, you know, with a consistent, you know, with ammo, food, and resources to keep the siege going. And then the fight happens if you somehow breach the fortifications.
Massive army simultaneously.
Excuse me.
Daun was no stranger to Frederick, although the Prussian king didn't know it. The Austrian field marshal made a name for himself a decade earlier, seeing combat at Chotositz, Hohenfriedberg, and Sola. Whereas Daun had ample opportunity to study Frederick as a commander, Frederick barely knew anything about him. This was the first time he faced an army commanded by Daun. Upon learning of Daun's strength, Frederick's first act was to dispatch the Duke of Brunswick-Bevern in Kolin's direction. With a 19,000-strong army, he marched east, capturing supply depots along the way. If you like the battle sequence and animations I create for these videos,
check them out if you're interested.
Meanwhile, the Prussians were slowly grasping the severity and impact the Battle of Prague caused to their army. The situation was bad. The final figures of Prague were worse than expected. A surviving account of one of the Prussian officers clearing the battlefield reveals: "It is dreadful beyond conception to walk in a field of battle after victory, to see friends and enemies, men and horses, the dead and dying all heaped together, and almost floating in blood. The stench of carnage fills the air with infection, and the groans of those who yet live rise as if in union on every side."
Would you lot agree that this is sort of a description of PTSD in a way? I think this is a great description.
Then Frederick received news of a new Franco-Austrian treaty in which France pledged 120,000 soldiers and not laid down arms until Austria captured Silesia entirely. Letters from the Duchy of Prussia revealed a Russian fleet entered the Baltic Sea, and an Austrian deserter confirmed Frederick's worst fear. Prague held enough provisions to last a couple of months at least. Not knowing what to expect of his adversary, Frederick decided to raise a force and travel east. He left Field Marshal Keith in charge of the siege of Prague. A letter he wrote Keith on June 6 reveals he was confident but serious about the situation. Leopold Daun is being reinforced. We must prevent him interfering with us. We must put together all we can, attack him, and chase him away as far as possible. On June 14, Frederick linked up with Bevern nearby Kolin. Bevern informed him that Daun was commanding a worrisome large army. Daun camped near Czoslau and had just received direct orders from Maria Theresa to relieve Prague's garrison. He ran into Zieten's hussars multiple times, preventing a direct attack against Bevern's force, but certainly alerting him that the Prussians knew of his whereabouts. Frederick did not know about Daun's goal to relieve Prague, but he did suspect battle was imminent. He sent word to Prince Moritz of Anhalt-Dessau at Prague. Moritz rounded up any and all soldiers he could find who would not be missed during the siege. 48 hours later, Moritz arrived at Kolin with reinforcements. Frederick commanded some 35,000 men. Daun still outnumbered him significantly by some 20,000. Thanks to the skirmishes, Daun was well aware that the Prussians were in the region. His scouts informed him of Bevern's army, augmented by Frederick and Moritz. With some characteristic cautious maneuvering, Daun marched against the Prussians, reaching their flank. On the evening of June 16, he deployed his army in two lines on the slight slopes south of the Imperial Road. They spanned from Blinka all the way towards Ksetjos. The regulars under General Beck held Panyan. Nadashti's regulars remained south of the main army, able to move towards whichever flank required them. The Austrian movements did not go unnoticed. Frederick camped nearby Kolin and realized Daun attempted to cut them off. He decided to move his entire army to the north. Meanwhile, Daun received a false message that Frederick expected up to 60,000 reinforcements later that night. So Daun expanded his lines, with his left towards Kriechnau and his right towards Radovesnitz. By the morning of June 18, Daun's men were ready. He commanded between 28 and 34,000 infantry, between 14 and 18,600 cavalry, and around 150 artillery pieces. Meanwhile, Frederick decided it was time to move. Surely he could circumvent Daun's army, reach the east's lower slopes and flank the Austrians. When Beck was quickly expelled from Panyan, his confidence grew. Adhering to that strategy, his commanders ordered their army forward. In total, Frederick commanded between 32 and 34,000 soldiers, 18,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry, and some 88 guns. Frederick kept part of his cavalry in reserve for a mopping up operation, or reinforcements if need be. He had no idea Daun extended his position to Ksetjos and Radovesnitz. At noon on June 18, an exceptionally dry and hot summer's day, the Prussian columns began their march from Panyan. General Johann Dietrich von Hülsen commanded the vanguard. Lieutenant General von Treshkov followed with his division. Zieten commanded some 50 squadrons of hussars to protect the flank. Manstein commanded the middle and Bevern the right. As the Prussian column marched, news reached Frederick that it may take longer than anticipated to circumvent the Austrians. Rumors of Daun expanding his lines east worried the king. Some woodlands, the Eichenwald, lay south of Ksetjos. When the Austrian bombardment erupted, Frederick figured passing through the woodlands would achieve the same encirclement effect with fewer casualties. He told Hülsen to explore the shortcut. But Frederick had no idea that this uphill shortcut marched straight into General von Wietz's hidden division. Combined with the infantry deployed within the village, the Austrians were about to shoot at the oblivious Prussians like fish in a barrel. When they turned south, parallel to Xetchus, indeed the Prussian infantry came under heavy fire. Hearing the noise of battle and volleys, Frederick deduced the Austrian right flank was much stronger than he anticipated. This was it. There was no more time for elaborate maneuvering. As Zieten ran into Nadashti's cavalry to the east, Frederick ordered Moritz to launch a frontal charge against the Austrian positions. Statements survive of Moritz telling Frederick the idea was ridiculous, but to no avail. Fraser writes the infantry marched forward in a frontal attack uphill, outnumbered, and with no favorable circumstances whatsoever. It was a desperate maneuver. The Austrian infantry and artillery, safely positioned on the Xetchus hill, launched volley after volley. They tore into Moritz's division. The prince reportedly exclaimed the battle was lost. Meanwhile, the rest of the Prussian column was still trekking along the Imperial Road and taking their positions. Pro-Red sharpshooters positioned around Brezan picked off soldiers on the flank. In an attempt to mitigate the casualties, Major General von Manstein took part of his army and charged into the village direction. He scattered the sharpshooters. However, the town enjoyed more defenders than he anticipated, and as savage fighting erupted, he called in support of his reserves. As the fighting around Brezan and Chosenitz continued, his soldiers slowly pushed towards the hill. The advance began extending beyond what Manstein intended, but the chaos on the ground prevented him from pulling his army back safely. Several detachments began climbing the Przerovsky hill. Along most of the Prussian front, the scene was the same. Infantry climbing over their dead or dying comrades, sustaining heavy fire. But Manstein's attack did ensure the Austrians could not reinforce their right flank. In utter desperation at his lack of reinforcements, Frederick ordered 67-year-old General Peter von Pennever to launch a cavalry charge. They advanced past Brezan before being mauled by heavy artillery fire and a subsequent cavalry counterattack. Despite the casualties, at around 7 p.m., Moritz's infantry reached the top of the Xezers hill. The subsequent close combat appeared to favor the Prussians. Another charge launched by Bevern pushed into the Austrian left flank, on top of the Przerovsky. Then on the far left of the Prussians, Major General Christian von Kossig launched a charge against the village. The combination of the sudden momentum, the Prussian advance, and the Austrians running out of ammunition and wavering lines made it seem like Prussia was about to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It would not have been the first time, but it just wasn't enough.
Well, yeah, because of the past battles that the narrator mentioned of Frederick's managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
Krosigk was struck by a cannonball, dying on impact. Fighting continued for a while, but the brigade began wavering before cracking and scattering. Pennever's damaged cavalry retreated to the Imperial Road. The Prussian infantry was exhausted and battered. Whenever they made an opening in the Austrian lines, it was filled with fresh reserves. Finally, the late Krosigk's cavalry suffered heavy counterattacks by the much more numerous Austrian cavalry stationed near the Icon Valley. Bevern's infantry suffered heavy casualties, battered by the artillery and infantry on the hill. Some sources indicate Bevern managed to scale the hill and line up his army. But the flanking of the Netherlands Linie Dragoon Regiment from the left crushed his infantry, and they retreated through the Imperial Road. On the left, the Austrian cavalry surrounded the Prussian vanguard. Breshkov was wounded and captured, together with his infantry. At around 8 p.m., the Prussians retreated. Zieten and Hüssen maintained order among their troops, preventing Dawn from following up the victory with a chase. Kolin's score was gruesome. The Prussian army received an enormous blow. Of their infantry, 8,755 were killed or missing, 3,568 were wounded. Of the cavalry, 1,450 men and even more horses were killed. To put this into perspective, over a third of the troops deployed became a casualty statistic. They lost an additional 5,380 men as POWs. Dawn lost 8,114 soldiers, most of whom were wounded, totaling about 15% of the troops deployed. The Austrians camped on the field, a classic sign of victory. When news of the victory reached Vienna, the city burst into spontaneous celebration. Maria Theresa created the eponymous order, awarding Dawn the first Grand Cross. Allegorical works were written and the Pope conferred his indescribable jubilation. As you can imagine, the mood in Berlin stood in stark contrast to these jubilations. After nearly 2 decades of incredible successes, this defeat served as a cold shower to the Prussians. Tim Blenning writes, "In just a few hours, Frederick lost more than a battle. His superhuman reputation had collapsed." Austrian memoirs reveal how their opinion of Prussian soldiers shifted. It turned out they could be made to flee. In a letter to Marshal Keith, Frederick conceded he had tried to do too much with too few. He became depressed and disillusioned, ordering Prince Henry to prepare to lift the siege of Prague. His cynic wit shows in one of his letters, "Success breeds overconfidence, and the next time I will do better. Every man must have his setbacks, and it seems I shall have mine." In his political testament, written 11 years after the battle, Frederick wrote how if they had won at Kolin, the Austrian army in Prague would have had to capitulate, the French army would not have crossed the Rhine, the Russians would have stayed at home, and Austria would have had to make peace on Prussian terms. Blenning remarks very much to the point. In the event, the opposites of those things happened, and with them, the defeat transformed the very nature of the war. Frederick's war was about to turn into a war of attrition, and his enemies were more than ready to capitalize on the Austrian success. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank...
Okay, that'll do it.
All my patrons and all my channel members for their generous support. If you...
And that'll do it. This has been another interesting video. Sorry about the yawning, but I've made the mistake of recording this late at night. So and there's not much more I can add. It's another interesting video, and interesting to see how Frederick the Great's first defeat played out. So not much I can add to that. So anyway, if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next